Hello everybody! Today I'm going to show you how you can turn an oversized shirt into a bomber jacket. That's today on Refashioning with Rachel. For this project, you will need to find a shirt that fits you loosely. This was a new shirt that I got at a thrift store, so that was nice. And you also want to find a shirt with some thick material. This shirt was lined, so it made it nice and warm. You also need just a little bit of scrap stretchy fabric. Just about half a yard should do fine. So first, while wearing the shirt, place a pin where you want the jacket to end. And also place a pin where you want the cuffs to end, somewhere in between the two big knuckles of the thumb. We will be adding ribbing to the bottom of the shirt, but we also have to account for seam allowance. So measure 2 inches above where you put the pin and draw in a straight line at that point and cut. And set that bottom piece aside for now. Make a mark 2 inches above where you put the pin in the sleeve. Draw in a line at that point and cut. And use the piece you cut off of one sleeve as a template for the other sleeve. And also trim off the collar and the collar band from the shirt. And set that aside and grab your stretchy fabric. We are going to need a couple yards or more of 5-inch wide strips. So just cut out 2 or 3 5-inch wide strips of fabric from your stretchy fabric. Square off the end of one of these strips. And now get your hip measurement from about where you want the jacket to end, which in my case was 36 inches, and add 1 inch to that for seam allowance, and then cut out a strip of fabric that length. Fold it in half, hot dog style, with right sides together, and pin at the ends. And sew them down using 1/2 inch for seam allowance. Trim off the corners, and then turn them right side out, poking out the corners. And then make sure the whole strip is folded in half nicely with wrong sides together. Find the center of the strip and mark it with a pin. And find the center back of the bottom of the shirt and pin it to the right side of the center back of the bottom of the shirt, lining up all the raw edges. Then pin the end of the strip to the end of the shirt, lining it right up to the button placket. And now stretch the strip so that it is as long as the bottom of the shirt, and pin it to the shirt in a few places, making sure the stretch of the strip is evenly distributed. And do this on both sides of the shirt. And sew. Make sure to gently stretch the stretchy fabric as you sew so that it lines up with the shirt fabric. And also make sure the beginning and the end of the strip line up perfectly with the end of the button plackets. And now serge or zigzag the raw edges of this seam. I'm using a serger throughout this project, but you can just use a zigzag stitch and just set it to a wide stitch. And just make sure one stitch goes on the fabric and one stitch goes off the fabric, and it will wrap up the raw edges nicely. Now push the finished seam allowance up towards the shirt material and stitch it down just a couple of millimeters away from the seam. Just tuck away any loose threads underneath the seam. And I'm just lining up the edge of the presser foot with the seam to make a nice even stitch. And you kind of want to keep everything spread out and nice and taut as you make this stitch. Now moving on to the collar. Grab a shirt that fits you well and measure around the collar band. That's that little strip in between the shirt and the collar. Add 1 inch to that measurement and cut out a strip of fabric that long. Fold it in half with wrong sides together. Mark the center with a pin and make a mark 1/2 inch away from the end on the folded side of the strip. Make a mark 1/2 inch down from the neck hole on the inside stitching line of the button placket on both sides. Make a mark at the center back of the neck hole and pin your new collar band to that mark, lining up the raw edges. Now pin that mark that we made on the folded side of the collar band to the mark we made on the inside stitching line of the button placket. This might seem weird, but just go with me for now. The corner point of the collar strip should line up with the raw edge of the neck hole. So pin the other side of the collar band to the other point on the other side. Now stretch the collar band so that it fits with the neck hole and pin the collar band down at the shoulder seam. And at this point, make sure all the raw edges are lined up. Now the rest of the collar band will have this wonky triangle sticking out. But just stretch the collar band so that it fits with the neck hole and place the pin somewhere in the middle. And do the same thing on the other side. And now we're going to sew this down using 1/2 inch of seam allowance and ignoring those triangle bits for now. So make sure these two marks are lined up and the corner of the neckband is just kissing that raw edge. And start sewing, just making sure you're 1/2 inch away from the raw edge of the neck hole. So you're just looking at the fabric of the shirt and stretching the collar band as you sew. And now you can see that the new collar band is attached, and it just gradually tapers as it gets to the center front. But let's clean it up a little bit. First, cut off those triangle bits that hang from the collar band. And then serge or zigzag the raw edges. Now open up the seam and fold the seam allowance toward the shirt. and stitch it down, making a stitch close to the seam. So once again, I'm using the edge of the presser foot as my guide, and tucking in any loose threads into the seam. And I also want to make sure that the top of the button placket ends in a nice crisp right angle. And now for the cuffs. Measure your wrists to get a comfortable circumference and add 1 inch for seam allowance. And cut 2 strips of fabric that are that length. Fold them in half with right sides together, hamburger style, and sew. Now halfway unfold the cuffs over themselves. And just check that they fit comfortably. And put a pin on the opposite side of the seam on the raw edge side. And this step is easier if you work with the shirt inside out. Place the cuff inside the sleeves, lining up the pin you just put in the cuff with the top of the sleeve, and then also pin the seam of the cuff to the underarm seam of the sleeve. And add a couple more pins halfway in between each of these pins. And sew. And you might have to stretch the cuff a lot to make it line up with the fabric. You can also just scrunch up and crumple the shirt fabric as you go. It won't be noticeable when you're wearing the shirt. Serge or zigzag the raw edge. and then stitch down the seam allowance, folding it toward the inside of the shirt. And for the cuffs, I find this much easier to do from the inside of the cuff, sewing directly on the cuff and lining up the edge of the presser foot with the seam. Just be careful when going over any bulky bits. Okay, now all of the trimmings are finished, but I'm going to add some pockets. This step is, of course, optional. First, draw in where you want the pocket openings. This should be about a 5-inch long line, somewhere close to the sides of the jacket. And copy these markings to the other side. And now grab the fabric that you cut off the bottom of the shirt and cut down either side of the button placket. We want the folded part of this piece to extend toward the center of the jacket, and the bottom part to roughly line up with the bottom of the jacket. And then we want about 1 inch of clearance around the opening that we drew into the sides of the jacket. Now transfer the marks for the opening of the pocket that you made on the jacket onto this piece. And now use this piece as a template to cut out another one. And transfer the markings for the opening of the pocket onto this piece as well. Now open up this piece so you only have 1 layer of fabric and pin it to the jacket, lining up all the markings. The side of this pocket piece that is facing the jacket will be visible from the outside of the jacket. So I want a little bit of the darker gray to be peeking through, so I'm having the darker side of the fabric facing the outside of the jacket, if that makes sense. And now sew a rectangle around the line. So as I'm sewing, I'm just making sure to keep the left side of the presser foot lined up with the line I drew in. And then when I get to the top and the bottom of the line, I just pivot 90 degrees and sew across, and then sew down, keeping the left side of the presser foot lined up with the line. Now cut open this rectangle all down the center to about a centimeter away from the end, and then cut right up to those corners, but don't cut through them. And then stuff all that fabric into that hole you just made. Then flip it over so you're working on the inside of the jacket, and iron that seam, pressing everything toward the opening of the hole. Which should help everything lie more flat. And then iron the rectangle down so it's nice and crisp. And then working on the right side of the jacket, sew all along this rectangle to hold everything in place. Just keep this stitch about 1 millimeter away from the edge. And now fold the rest of the pocket fabric on top of itself, and pin around the edges, and sew it together. Then serge or zigzag any raw edges. And now we have some pockets. But they kind of flop around and end up hanging beneath the jacket a little bit, so I want to sew them in place. So pin the sides of the pocket to the button placket, and stitch it down, stitching through the stitching line that is already in the button placket. That way it won't be so visible from the outside. Also, stitch the bottom of the pockets to the bottom of the jacket, right on top of the stitching line that is already there. And this project is finished. So here's a reminder of how it looked before. And here's how it looks now. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe and comment if you did. And check out some of my other videos. And have a beautiful day.